Hello, lovelies. So I bought the new 5th edition, I guess, Werewolf the Apocalypse, because I'm a dumb sucker, clearly. Running Tabletopless gives me some interesting opportunities to buy things that I might not otherwise necessarily buy out of curiosity or whatever. And we are playing Vampire, the latest edition, on Tabletopless, so I really bought this so I could provide some up-to-date and compatible werewolf antagonists to our vampire game. So I'm a dumb sucker, but it will at least be somewhat useful for that, I guess. Now, I didn't play that much Old School Werewolf, but I did play in the Werewolf LARPs in the Camarilla a little bit to try and promote and sustain non-vampire play a little and to encourage crossover play and so on. And I played as a tribeless Métis, or Métis, serving the Magpie totem, and most of my choices there have been invalidated by this new edition. They do say right from the get-go, almost, right here, that this is a reimagining, a reboot, which Vampire explicitly wasn't. Partly, I think, because the New World of Darkness wasn't a success, to put it mildly. But Vampire, they definitely did return to the well. The Gehenna, the apocalypse has happened in Vampire. So this seems an odd choice, because obviously in the older games, everything existed within the same world. And for werewolves to exist within the apocalypse, because the end times all kind of came together across worlds in the previous one, for them to be in it now, but for this to be a reboot, doesn't fit together properly with Vampire, the only other game we've really had released so far. And yet this means I am now extremely trepidatious about what might happen to Mage, which is my absolute favourite White Wolf game, eclipsing even Vampire. If they take a similar approach that they have here, I'm worried. Extremely worried. It also means that there have been a lot of changes. In Vampire, the changes were largely set dressing. I think less fundamental. They changed a few names because the Ministry is so much more evocative than Followers of Set. Language is a bit of a theme lately, isn't it? With Wizards of the Coast giving out their 5 words you can't say in role playing or whatever. But yeah, reimagining. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Would be more of my approach. I wish they'd just gone with the continuity along properly, which sadly they haven't. Now, this book looks cheaper than the Vampire book, but I don't think that necessarily is a bad thing, and I don't know how much it reflects on the fate of the company. Whether they're trying to save money by using cheaper paper stock and cheaper colour printing, I don't know, but I actually prefer this, perversely. And there are much more illustrations than photos and photo manipulation in this book, and overall I prefer the look and feel of it. It's not humongously evocative of werewolf as I remember it in a lot of places, and it suffers from the lack of contrast that comes partly with the printing process, partly with trends in illustration and design. But in this book, at least, it kind of works. The build quality also feels better than the original Vampire core book as well. So I hope it would hold together better than that. They do have a mature content warning where they talk about the heritage of the game and the themes and stuff, and forewarn you that this game deals with controversial issues and difficult issues and certain themes. But then you find that those themes that you would expect from the old Werewolf have been neutered and toned down or excised, and hypocritically, after that warning, the game also includes things like safety tools, cautions against bleed, X cards, lines and veils, and so on, and other bollocks. And I don't think this is bad just because it is being done to normalize these tools. I worry the more and more that this happens, that more and more people are coming into gaming and expecting these things and thinking they're the norm and imposing them on their own games, rendering their games less fun, less evocative, less imaginative. It worries me, and it concerns me as an artist, as a creative, as a player of games, moving forward into the future. We've got damn near 50 years of psychological research telling us that bleed isn't really a thing. That people don't get mixed up with their characters. You might get upset when your character dies or whatever, but some people cry when a dog dies in a TV show, even though the dog's safe. It's just part of the narrative. It's not bleed. You're not thinking it's real, and good. It evoked an emotion. That's what this is ostensibly all about. The storyteller's art. As a creative, you want to evoke emotions and things in people, and all of these safety tools and so on are roadblocks, are hurdles that get in the way of having an artistic experience, an emotional experience, a moving experience with art. Games are safe. You will not get hurt. And this game doesn't even use D4s, so you're not going to hurt yourself that way. Safe space used to mean a place where it was safe to talk about and discuss these difficult issues that they bring up in the beginning, or your own personal difficult issues. But now it means a space where nothing with one scintilla of a threatening aura to it is allowed. That misses the point. Ironically, they've formalized what used to be called Harano, which is despair in the face of what's happening to the world. That I'm fairly certain that used to be a thing in the old editions. But now they also have this thing called Hauglosk, which, as I say, is ironic, because Hauglosk is being self-righteously angry, knowing that you're right and taking it too far, my way or the highway. Was that a sly dig at activists? Maybe, but then why include the things that the activists seem to want so much? At this point, safety tools just hits me the same way the old disclaimers, don't go running around in the steam tunnels, games aren't real, is what we used to put in our books with a nod and a wink. Right, safety tools is the new version of that, but again, this time the call is coming from inside the house, and is much more insidious and dangerous for all that. Maybe the makers are suffering a bit of Hauglosk themselves. Certainly, some of the audiences. There haven't been, so far as I've seen, any of the kind of flirting with dangerous ideas that took place in the lead up to Vampire 5th edition, and at least people aren't claiming that the die rolls are secret far-right dog whistles this time. But yeah, that comes through in the caution that suffuses this book and many of the key changes. They're lower power werewolves now. There's a bit more focus on the social game. There's a bit more flexibility in power levels. Those are the same kind of things we saw in vampires, and maybe we could expect those. But we also see the same and indeed more neutering and renaming, seemingly with little reason, really, and losing a great deal of the evocative power or the energy of the tropes that were used before. So werewolves are not just depowered in rules terms, but they're also conceptually neutered or spayed, I guess, in some cases. Like, there's no breeds. So whether you were born a wolf or a man doesn't seem to make much, never mind, altogether here. And there are no metis, no meti, so there are there's no werewolf on werewolf, resulting in mutational inbreeding here. So if you've got a breeding kink, you're out of luck. But if you've got a furry kink, Garu can now fuck each other with no problem. So the sexual themes, a lot of which used to underlie werewolf, that is largely gone. There are no kinfolk. There's no worry about the inbreeding. It's less of a duty for werewolves to have or to raise offspring or breed with as many kinfolk as possible. So that's all largely gone. And all the themes and the darker themes that creates largely seem to have been gone. All the good, all the bad seems to have been quietly shuffled off to the side of the table for being problematic or degenerate, I guess. And that bleeds into some of the tribes as well, along with the other neuterings. Like, the Black Furies are no longer feminist extremists. I never particularly liked the Black Furies, but I think it's a pity that theme doesn't come out so much. The Bone Noras have much less emphasis on degeneracy, interbreeding with dogs, and having a large number of meti. That's gone. Children of Gaia, that changed, a bit watered down. The loss of sexual themes certainly has affected the Children of Gaia. Fianna now no longer exist, and are now Heart Wardens, with a lot less Celtic influence. Now, we certainly have problems in the LARP society with Americans playing Fianna and wanting their backgrounds to be tied into the troubles in Ireland and being very insensitive. American plastic paddies are probably some of the worst expats in the world. But again, it's still less evocative, less meaningful, less interesting now that they've gotten rid of it. I think the Gale Stalkers are the Wendigo, but they've been similarly stripped down. There's less emphasis on the Native Americans or First Nations or whatever you want to call it. Less emphasis on that, which, if you're trying to be politically correct, shouldn't you have dialed that up rather than down? The Ghost Council appear to be the Uktena. The Glasswalkers are largely unchanged. The Get of Fenris are not an available tribe for you to play now, and they're now called the Cult of Fenris, and they've gone rogue. Now, that seems a shame, but maybe, given who's producing the game these days, there's a certain sensitivity to Nordic themes, the way in which the far right has co-opted a lot of them. And if you put that together with the ideas of bloodline and so on that used to be part of Werewolf, you can see why they might have cold feet about that. But those bloodline and familial themes are now gone, so there doesn't seem to be much reason to have gotten rid of the Get of Fenris, other than just maybe not wanting people to play characters tied into Nordic themes. Maybe they're as sensitive about that as people from the British Isles are about the Fianna. I don't know, but it seemed really odd and out of place and a huge shame. The Red Talons aren't changed that much, except that breed doesn't really mean much of anything anymore, but the relative lack of change for the Red Talons throws the other tribes and their changes into sharp relief. The Shadow Lords and the Silverfangs are largely unchanged, so you can retain that sort of internecine struggle for power between them as a theme in your games without too much trouble. Silent Striders just seem less evocative. The Black Spiral Dancers still exist, but without the whole sexual politics and issues of the Garou as were. They're less effective, less interesting, less horrific, and without the Métis as well, they also lose some of their most evocative horror and the reasons why there are so many more Black Spiral Dancers than the other tribes, and why they're so mutated and dysfunctional. Kinfolk doesn't really exist anymore. Becoming a werewolf seems to be part hereditary and part some X factor that happens semi-randomly. So basically, anyone could become a werewolf randomly out of nowhere due to some kind of spiritual connection to the world or something, but it is more likely amongst people who are descended from other Garou, but there are no kinfolk. So there's no whole extended family or kind of backwards hillbilly sort of thing going on, which again is a loss, I think, because the kinfolk were such an essential, important aspect of Old School Werewolf that you've lost a lot by taking that out along with the Métis. The racial bloodline elements, and you understand why they're sensitive in the modern context, but that was part of what made them so engaging and in many cases so horrific, especially when you consider the werewolves existing within a state of extremis. You know, it was always about how far will you go to achieve your ends, and that applied as much to family politics and breeding as it did to eco-terrorism, which you were kind of ahead of the curve of with Werewolf in the past. Whether it's racial purists aligning themselves with the Get of Fenris, bad, or attempts to recover and extend and maintain the culture of nearly extinct tribal peoples, First Nations and native groups, good. All of that is gone, basically. And certainly I always interpreted that as being a major theme and a major element in Werewolf. But if you were less interested in extreme situations and sexual politics and sexual content, then it's going to bother you less. I guess the one good thing about all this reinterpretation, particularly of the what were the Native American tribes, is that the game is now overall less Americano-centric than it was. It's been blunted a little bit, and for those of us outside the US who play these sorts of games, that's quite a good thing. I haven't talked much about system because there's not really a huge amount to talk about here. Most of the systems will be familiar from anyone who's played the new Vampire. Werewolves are less powerful than they were, but so are vampires, so is everything, really. I'm not a huge fan of the hunger dice in Vampire, but if we compare the rage dice mechanic in Werewolf with the hunger dice mechanic in Vampire, it's a bit like comparing Urkel with fucking Shaft. The system for the rage dice is awkward, easy to forget, easy not to be able to just kind of see when you roll, because one rage dice coming up as a failure, is bad, but two or more coming up a failure is good somehow. So it's a bit awkward and counterintuitive and doesn't go along with the rest. So I can see a lot of mistakes being made in the moment, unless you're playing online with a pre-programmed system like on Roll20 or something that will take into account all of this stuff for you. I don't know why they went for that. I can think of easier, more elegant ways of using rage, but that's what they've gone with. And this is one arena where imitating the Vampire Games dice conventions, might have been better, actually. Or having the rage dice as bonus dice for certain rolls. But at the risk of losing it, that also might have been good. So basically, system-wise, it has the same benefits and drawbacks that the new Vampire has, which to a great extent were the same problems that the NWOD, the New World of Darkness, had. It's relatively simple, which is good. There's a lack of granularity, which is bad. It's kind of an all-in-one roll most of the time, which can be good, can be bad. It's faster, which is good. The explanations of the system still aren't great. The indexing and structure of the book isn't that great either. Combat rules are more of an afterthought, which is worse in Werewolf than it is in Vampire, because Werewolf has always had a great deal of emphasis on hulking out and smashing things, much more than Vampire was ever intended to have. The quirks and powers of Werewolf's gifts seem to be de-emphasized and are locked to renown a lot more, which is much more emphasized. The Umbra seems to be harder to enter, harder to leave, as a consequence of this and the change in the gifts. Rights are much more heavily emphasized than gifts, but obviously they're going to see generally a lot less use in play. So, the Umbra isn't described particularly well in enough depth, but then how many books did we have on the Umbra for old Werewolf? There aren't enough allies and antagonists. You should, with very small amounts of conversion, slight depowering and so on, still be able to use a lot of your old Werewolf material, particularly for antagonists and so on. That helps, but viewed as the new game by itself, the enemies and so on do seem a bit scant, too scant, I would say. So I suppose we'd better give this game some scores, hadn't we? Alright. In terms of style, I like it more than the new Vampire, in terms of its presentation and everything. A lot more than the new Vampire. Whether they're trying to save money or whether it's a conscious design choice, I don't know. But whatever the case, I do like that a lot more, and I like the heavier use of artwork over photography and photo manipulation a lot more. There are still issues around the writing, whether that's translation, English as a second language, whoever's doing the final sort of organisation of the book, I don't know, but there are problems there. And also the deballification of a lot of the concepts, the tribes and so on, brings the style score down as well. Even so, I'm gonna give it a low 4 for style. In terms of substance, antagonists and so on are lacking a bit, but it is a complete game. There is everything that you need here. I just don't think it's going to satisfy fans of the old Werewolf to a great degree, because it's lost so much of what gave that game its own independent feel, and its own independent mechanics. So in terms of substance, I'm going to give it a low 3. So that's 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5. I'm going to use it as a supplement to Vampire, so I probably won't buy any supporting books. I don't feel as ripped off or annoyed as I did by Vampire. Zang.
That makes me so angry. I feel the change coming.
Tal, friend, and welcome to Gore. Savage and beautiful, John Norman's Gorean saga is brought to life in the Tales of Gore role-playing game and its companion world book, World of Gore. Take flight on a tarn, luxuriate in the bathhouses of Ar, pit your steel against the deadly Kuri, best your enemies and place them in your collar. Tales of Gore uses the D6 system, perfect for both new and old players. You can purchase it from Amazon, RPG Now, or lulu.com. Ta Sada Gore.